In 2013, so 11 years ago, Donald Trump posted on Twitter about hosting the Miss Universe pageant in Moscow. He said online, quote, "Do you think Putin will go to the pageant? If so, will he become my new best friend?" What was that about? What grown man talks that way about anyone, let alone the president of Russia? But that was 2013. 2 years later, Donald Trump entered the Republican primary contest for president on the night of the third presidential primary debate. We later learned that that same night, he secretly signed a letter of intent to build Trump Tower Moscow, which would have been the biggest real estate project of his entire life. He lied about that and kept that secret throughout the campaign. We didn't learn about it until after he had been elected president. While he was president, he insisted on meeting one-on-one with Vladimir Putin without any American staff present, and he did so on at least 5 different occasions. In at least one of those instances, in a 2017 meeting in Germany, Trump personally confiscated the notes that had been taken at that meeting by his own interpreter. Since leaving the presidency, Bob Woodward now reports that Trump has continued to have secret one-on-one communications with Vladimir Putin, not only refusing to report his communications to the U.S. government, which is arguably illegal anyway, but he's also not been allowing even his own staff to be nearby when he speaks with Putin. What about his communications with Putin needs to be so secret? Putin's government, of course, interfered in the U.S. election in 2016 to try to help Trump get elected. In the 2020 election, they ran a robust foreign influence operation to try to prevent Joe Biden from becoming Trump's Democratic opponent. Now, in 2024, Russia is just flat out paying pro-Trump conservative commentators in the United States as part of yet another large Russian state-sponsored effort to try to help Donald Trump's campaign. We have a hard time in the United States calling whatever is going on with Donald Trump and the Republican Party, we have a hard time calling it authoritarianism. We get nervous about the word, the idea of authoritarianism. We get nervous about what that might mean here in a domestic context. But we can all at least agree that Trump does have some kind of weird freaking relationship, a servile, almost worshipful relationship with somebody who everyone in America can agree is an authoritarian, if not a fascist dictator, Vladimir Putin. And that admiration that Trump has for Putin is as inexplicable as ever. It's undimmed by the passing of years. And more explicitly now than ever before, it extends not just to Trump personally wanting Putin to like him, personally, seemingly Trump wanting to be like Putin, but now it explicitly seems to extend to Trump wanting our country, the United States, to be more like Russia is under Putin's control. So in this campaign for president, what we hear from Trump is that news organizations should not be allowed to air criticism of him or to air interviews with his opponents. He will shut those news organizations down when he is back in power. We hear from him that Democratic politicians should not be allowed to run against him, and they're all criminals. We hear from him that portions of the U.S. Constitution should be terminated. We hear from him that businesses that don't do what he wants will be crushed when he is back in power. He says, let's withdraw from NATO. Let's let Russia do, quote, whatever the hell it wants to our allies. Let's use the military against American civilians who dare to protest against him. Vladimir Putin has been in power in Russia for 25 years. Russia is the largest country in the world. It has almost infinite economic potential, particularly during this last 25 years. It is a country of fantastic natural resources, an almost unparalleled legacy of cultural and scientific achievement, a country whose enemies, frankly, mostly dissolved with the dissolution of the Soviet Union. The horizons were endless, possibilities limitless. But under Vladimir Putin, Russia, again, a country that covers 1/10 of the world's landmass, Russia has an economy smaller than Italy's. Russia's per capita GDP is lower than Bulgaria, lower than Mexico, lower than Guyana. And why is that? Well, while Russia languishes as a country, its criminal elite connected to Putin, they buy up luxury real estate and yachts and private jets and vineyards and resorts and private islands all over the world, including here. And Putin himself, long rumored to be the world's richest man, he builds himself palaces like this one on the Black Sea. Authoritarianism isn't just a textbook term in political science. And it isn't just dystopian, right? It isn't just cruel and repressive. It is also always corrupt and therefore pitiful. And everyone in the world deserves better. And in a better world, it would not be Vladimir Putin right now. It would be this man who would be the president of Russia, the head of the Anti-Corruption Foundation, a nonprofit organization in Russia, a man who made that video that I just showed you, showing Putin's secret palace on the Black Sea, along with so many other damning and incredibly newsworthy and incredibly well-researched investigative reports on the secret wealth of Putin and his henchmen who have spent the last 25 years robbing that country blind. His name is Alexei Navalny, and he is the most effective and inspiring opposition figure of modern Russia. And Alexei Navalny's leadership has been characterized by a refusal to be afraid, a relentless sense of humor, and an even more relentless commitment to the certainty that Putin's regime will end, that there will be a Russia without Putin, that it's inevitable, that the lies will collapse in on themselves, that the party of crooks and thieves, Putin's party, will finally be thrown out. The inevitable certainty that democracy is coming. They started arresting Alexei Navalny in 2011, and they never really stopped. They tried to blind him in chemical attacks twice. They banned him from running for office. They banned his organization. They ultimately gave it the same classification as Al-Qaeda and ISIS. They arrested and imprisoned his younger brother. They arrested his colleagues. They arrested even his lawyers. And then this year, this February, they killed him in prison. His wife, Yulia, survives him. They've now put out an arrest warrant for her as well. She lives in exile because she has to. Alexei Navalny was the man who should be the president of a free, democratic Russia right now in 2024. After his death, now, instead, it should be his wife. In some ways, it is his wife, Yulia Navalny, continuing the investigations into the corruption of the authoritarian regime that still rules her country, leading not yet a government, but for now, the people of that country, who aren't just yearning to be free from that stupid kleptocratic dictatorship, but leading the people who are actively working to get free and to prepare to live in a democracy instead, because the certainty remains that it is coming. And for us, for people all around the world, including here in the United States, who aren't trying to overthrow a dictatorship, who instead are trying to stop the authoritarian takeover of our existing democratic system. Well, this woman, this Yulia Navalny, seems like one of the most important people in the world who we could meet at the crossroads. Yulia Navalny is a Russian opposition leader. She is the wife, now the widow, of Alexei Navalny. Navalny's secret prison diaries and his memoir are somehow miraculously being published this week. The book is called Patriot, a Memoir. I read every word of the book. I could not put it down. Yulia Navalny, it is a real honor to have you here. Thank you.
Hello, Rachel. Thank you for having me. It's a great honor, and thank you for your kind words. It means a lot.
Did I say anything that rubbed you the wrong way or that seemed wrong to you?
Oh, you know, you said too many good words in advance, I guess, some of them. But thank you.
I will tell you, we're in the midst of a very heated election season in this country, as you know, and my confession to you is that I did not intend to read all of the book. I thought, I am not going to have time. I'm really busy. I'm going to read the beginning and the end, have other people read it and tell me what it's about. I read every word of it. I couldn't stop reading it. I found it incredibly moving.
Thank you.
Can you tell me a little bit about what it took to get the book into print? I imagine that you had to have a hand in editing the manuscript. I imagine there may have been some hard decisions for you in terms of things that felt personal that you might have wanted to keep between you and your husband that you nevertheless put in the book. What was it like to bring it to fruition?
It's very important for me. This book is memory of my husband, his legacy. And that's why it was difficult in some ways to put some parts together. But I would say to you that we didn't cut, a lot in editing. No, I think that everything what was in this book, it was true, and I wanted to keep Alexei's voice to sound loud and to sound open, and his voice to bring the truth.
When he writes in the book about sort of spontaneously saying to a crowd of people that is assembled when he's been arrested, he's in trouble with the law and nobody knows what's going to happen to him. And he seems to he writes how he sort of surprised himself by saying, "Don't be afraid of anything." He writes about it as if that kind of burst out of him, and he was happy that it burst out of him. It's something that he'd been feeling, but he hadn't articulated that way. I think people in this country, certainly people around the world, indelibly think of him with that sentiment, not only because we know what ultimately happened to him, because long before they killed him, we knew what they were doing to him. And for him to not be afraid himself, but to tell other people, this is the secret. This is the way away. This is the way out of repression. This is the way to beat a dictator, is to not be afraid of him. Do you know where he learned that? I mean, it seems like you believe it too. Did the two of you come up with it?
I believe in it, but of course I would like to have to know more of his secrets, because he had a superpower in some ways, and he was so easily able to motivate people and to encourage people. Probably the secret is just to be honest with people, to be close to people, to love people, to believe in what you are doing, and just to follow this direction and to follow your inner rules. And it's very important to do this. Then to love country, to love family, to love the things you are doing, not to go to the office just to go to the office every day doing your job, just to live in this job, with this beliefs. And I think that it was for him not very hard, because he believed in everything what he was doing.
One of the things he writes about that's very moving is how much your support meant to him and how much it made him more capable as a leader and as an activist, to know that you were with him, that you agreed with him, that you already agreed with him before he'd ever had a chance to talk to you about it. He talks about it very movingly when he's been poisoned with a nerve agent. He's got nearly 3 weeks in a coma in Germany. They very nearly kill him. And he writes movingly about how your presence was a neurobiological miracle. It was the only thing that brought him back. And the thing that I thought about that, preparing to talk to you today, is that in many ways you've stepped into his shoes. You're the leader of the Russian opposition, because he can't be anymore. But who can be that role for you? Who can support you the way that you supported him?
Thank you. Everything what you are saying is a compliment.
Yeah.
And it's very nice to hear it. I think you call me the leader of opposition a little bit in advance. I would call myself a young politician, probably, in some ways. Of course, I knew about politics a lot, because I've been living with the leader, a real leader of opposition, for many years. But I promise I'll do my best. And it's very important for me in many reasons, and for my country, and for my family, and for my children, and for Alexei's memory. Who support me? I think that it's the main problem, because, of course, we supported each other.
Yeah.
And it was very easy for him and very easy for me in some very difficult moments, because, you know, after all these searches, we can go to lie down on the bed, just touching our hands, and it was like very helpful. Mm-hmm. And I miss it a lot. And I'm doing all these interviews, meetings, and everything, and what I wish a lot to come back home every evening and to discuss everything with him.
Right.
Or even when he was in prison, to write him a letter telling him what's going on in my life.
Yeah.
But still, I think that love to him, love to country, all the supporters who supported Alexei and who support me now, they give me power. Mm-hmm. And I appreciate all these kind words, a lot of letters of support from many, many people.
Even since Alexei was killed earlier this year, even since they first started arresting him, as I described in 2011, and since the Ukraine war has served as a pretext to increasingly ratchet up the punishment for dissent in Russia, I feel like even on that time frame, the repression right now of independent media, dissent, political opposition in Russia is cranked down tighter than I've ever seen it in the last 25 years. That the repression, in particular of the media, just feels total. And so while the Anti-Corruption Foundation continues doing its work, while the opposition continues doing its work, while you still try to find ways for people to express their resistance to the Putin regime, looking from the outside, I don't see how you do it, because I don't see that anybody has any space to operate without putting themselves in grave danger. And it just seems like there are so few people who have the kind of superhuman courage and bravery that your husband represented. How do you work in that repressive an environment?
You're right. There are no independent media inside Russia at all. All newspapers are closed. All, even sites and so on, which were independent inside Russia, they are closed. All these editors and all journalists are in exile. And it's very important to remember that there are no at all independent media inside Russia by now. I understand that while we're here in the United States discussing these, it's difficult to believe. Probably 2 or 3 of them can work in some ways. No. Everybody in exile, and a lot of journalists are called foreign agents. Mm-hmm. Part of our organization is called extremists. Me extremist as well, by the way.
There's an arrest warrant out
yes,
for you in Russia.
And it's very difficult to have any communication with people, because any connection with me, for example, could be called criminal case. It could be a criminal case could be opened because of this and so on. But still, we are working now in exile. We are based in one of Baltic countries, and we have NGO, which was in Moscow. We just moved from Moscow, and we continue to do everything what we did while we were in Russia. We continue our anti-corruption investigations. We continue our YouTube channels, which are very famous, not just now with our anti-corruption investigations, which you mentioned, but also we have a kind of YouTube TV. Mm-hmm. So we are doing independent news every day. We are doing a lot of interviews with people who are against war and Putin's regime. We are doing it every day, and we are trying to bring this information, and we can see that mostly people in Russia watch our YouTube channels.
Wow.
So they're seeking for this independent information, because it's not possible to find anything independent on Russian TV.
Alexei writes in the book that when the regime started arresting him and imprisoning him. He says they had two aims, and the first was to hurt his ability to work. He says when you're in prison, it's hard to get your work done. And even when you're under house arrest, it's hard to get your work done. And when he was obviously a very committed candidate for office, I found it very moving that he wrote about not wanting to be a protest or symbolic candidate. He wanted to be a candidate who would win. He believed in democracy and wanted to make people's votes really count for something. So it's to stop his work. The other reason for arresting him and charging him with the things they charged him with was to undercut his message. He's obviously an anti-corruption crusader, so they would charge him with things that made him seem like, oh, he's the corrupt one.
As well, sure.
It seems to me, though, that the other reason that there's a third aim in arresting him and imprisoning him, which is to break down other people's will, to make an example of him so that what happened to him would scare other people. Especially after what has happened to him and what has happened to the media and what has happened to the opposition and what has happened with Russia during the Ukraine war, which has made everything worse. Do you still believe that the collapse of the regime is inevitable and that Russia will be democratic one day?
Of course. How could I not believe? Alexei sacrificed all his life for this, and I feel like I must continue his work. I feel like I must continue what he did for many, many years. It's very important for me, and I believe that, all these changes, they very often happen in one day. It doesn't mean that we need to sit down in a chair and to wait them one day to another day. Of course, we need to do something, but it doesn't mean that we need to expect from people to do every day huge things. Just to do every day something small to encourage people, to motivate people, to show them that we are all together against this regime, against war, against Putin especially. And we are together in this aim. It's very important. So absolutely, I believe. And I don't promise you that it happened tomorrow. And we know that it could take years. I absolutely understand it. But from others' hand, how to live if not to believe in good changes.
As an American, I feel guilty that my government and my country was not able to do more to stop what they did to your husband. And I feel not necessarily guilty, but frustrated and angry that we haven't been able to do more to stop Putin from doing what he's done to the Russian people and now to the Ukrainian people and beyond. What could America do that we haven't done? What could America do to support effective opposition to his regime? What could America do more? What else could America have done to prevent the murder of your husband?
I don't want to blame anyone for this.
I understand.
Because it's Vladimir Putin who killed my husband, nobody else. But if to take a look at the past, I think that all the governments, democratic governments, were playing with Putin for many years a kind of game. Trying to negotiate with him, seeking connections with him, waiting probably that one day he will become one of them, a kind of normal. But the one thing which they didn't notice and which we must remember, that Putin always lies. And I think that governments and officials, they just missed this moment. So Putin was trying year by year to move these borders and he was doing awful things, more and more awful, and everybody was sitting and waiting. Probably the next day he will stop. But we need to remember that he never stopped, and of course it was a mistake that all this pressure on Putin has started just from after the war. The war in Ukraine has started.
I apologize for asking you an American-centered question, but we have this big, very high-stakes election right now, and
I know.
You're aware.
I'm aware of it.
I do think that the relationship, the sort of admiration that the Republican candidate Donald Trump has for Putin is inexplicable, and it's undimmed. It hasn't changed at all. I do think that he is proposing that the United States should drop our form of government and adopt something more like what Putin has done to Russia. And if we choose him as our president, that means that America has freely and of our own free will electively chosen that kind of a change for us as a country. And we might do it. I don't know what's going to happen in this election. From your vantage point, how does that strike you? What do you think about the fact that America may choose that as its future?
I hope that America will do the right choice. And I believe in democratic institutions. I still think that, I know that you have a lot of conversations and they still work or not, but comparing to Russia, I can be just jealous that you are having such things like independent court, independent media. You can criticize candidates on TV, and so I'm sure that America will do the right choice and everything will be fine.
You've had some interaction, I know, in particular with Vice President Kamala Harris. When you were named one of the world's most influential people by Time magazine, she wrote the write-up about you. What have your interactions with her been like, and do you feel like she understands the stakes of what you're fighting for? Last
time I spoke with her on 1st of August by phone. It was, she called me after prisoner swap, which happened between America, Germany, and Russia, and I really appreciate it. It was very warm, very private and personal talk, and she told me that she remembered what my husband and my family did and are doing to make Russia democratic country, and of course I very appreciate that exactly at this day she called me, and it means for me a lot.
Last question for you. I think it means a lot to the world that Patriot, a memoir, Alexei's prison diaries, but also his memory, but also his memoir are out now. It's a remarkable book. As I said, I did not intend to read all of it. I did not have time. You really messed me up.
Sorry.
It's all right. But it took a lot to get this out into the world, a lot of risk and a lot of effort, and it is a remarkable document. What do you want people to take away from this? What do you think is the most important thing for people to know about this book?
There are two parts. I want people to be encouraged by this book, not to give up, not continue fight, because as you know, now in the world, there are more and more authoritarian regimes.
Yes.
And Alexei is a great example that people never give up. Even in prison, even in torturing conditions, they continue their fight, because he was fighting even from prison. But also, of course, people will know my husband, that he was a great man, that he was very kind, very funny, and very beloved person.
His sense of humor and his creativity, even under duress, to me is inspiring. And I don't know other resistance leaders of my generation, of my time, that bring that to it in a way that really made me think in a completely different way about what it means to stand up for freedom, stand up for freedom of choice. Yulia Navalnaya, it is a real honor to have you here, and I wish all the best for you. I just hope doors open for you everywhere, and I wish all the best for you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.